Hotep. Welcome to welcome to Journey in the Self. I'm your host Sarah. We are now going to do Donald Trump Insider Establishment, episode 18. For background, we started this series with the intent to basically demonstrate that nothing in the political order has changed. Players have changed, but the people behind the scenes have not changed. The pawns, the the knights, all the different characters on the chessboard, they've been changed. Some have been put in check, some have been moved out of the game, some have been moved in the game, but at the core, the players have always been the same. They and all the different players that exist now are controlled by the same people, including Donald Trump. Those people who have been considered to be the puppet masters, those who are controlling things behind the scenes, have been referred to in the past as the establishment. The most current colloquial term for the establishment has been the term the deep state, a term that is in popular use by Donald Trump himself, as well as his MAGA followers. And the primary reason that I sought to focus particularly on Donald Trump, not that he is, again, any different than the others, but that his election campaign and his platform was driven by the illusion and phrase that he often used, which was that he was coming to drain the swamp, to basically rid the system of the deep state. And so, and many people have believed that to be true. Many people still believe it because they want to believe it and are intent on ignoring the facts. But we intend and have shown the facts nonetheless. People choose to believe still because they don't want to believe differently. But facts are facts. So in the past, we've gone into the history to identify some of the key players in the so-called establishment. We've gone back and gone into the backgrounds of some key individuals who have been instrumental in the ascension of Donald Trump, going back to his days as a real estate developer, going back to the time when he declared bankruptcy because his real estate empire was failing, particularly during the economic downturn, the real estate crisis. He had filed bankruptcy and was bailed out by N.M. Rothschilds and Sons with the assistance of Wilbur Ross, who was a representative of Rothschild and Sons Bank. We documented the fact that much of his initial fortune and he being put into the real estate game was with the assistance of the Rothschilds. We talked about the Mary Carter Paint Company and those connections. that Mary Carter Payne had to the Rothschild to organize crime, particularly Meyer Lansky, and the connections that they had to the intelligence community, in particular the CIA. And all that is relevant when we bring that forward to current events, because we see some of those same players who are prominently involved in things that are unfolding in the present moment. So we'll see some of those same names and same players connecting to Jeffrey Epstein. We've shown how Jeffrey Epstein has mirrored the pattern of people like Roy Cohn, who was Donald Trump's lawyer, who held similar parties, with the exception of the fact that the people who were being exploited at his parties were young boys. We showed how many people patronized Roy Cohn's parties, including one of Trump's advisors, Roger Stone. We noted how Roy Cohn also operated in such a manner as to record those parties, to use them as leverage against others. We showed how the mafia, particularly the Jewish mafia under Meyer Lansky, operated in a similar fashion, recording that type of information to use as leverage. We've shown how those individuals have had connections to Israel and the Mossad. We've shown how Robert Maxwell was an intelligence agent for the Mossad and was murdered because he threatened to expose some information. But that he was friends with Epstein even before he began his relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell. We talked about, I think we did talk about some of the connections between Donald Trump and his financing issues in connections to Russia, and how those things also tied into Israel. We talked about how the Bolshevik revolution, which created the Soviet Union, were primarily initiated by Jews. We talked about in other shows where in Ashkenazi Jews, or Zionist Jews, if you will, not to impugn all Jews. We talked about in other shows and documented that the Rothschild family were the primary impetus between the establishment of the state of Israel, and how the Mossad was integral in that. We talked about, when we were going deep into that topic, we went into Benjamin Friedman's book, Facts Are Facts, where he documented a number of things that Ashkenazic and Zionist Jews had done to manipulate the United States into the war. I mean, but the importance of going over all of this is to be basically demonstrate that the players who are behind the scenes, manipulating events, controlling affairs, and so forth, are the same ones who are behind controlling the politicians, including Donald Trump. So that was the importance of me going back over through that information, is to illuminate the fact that, no pun intended, but to illuminate that nothing has changed, that the same players who were operating things going back to when the state of Israel was founded, back to World War II, up until the current moment, the players are the same. They control the politicians then, they control the politicians now, they control Donald Trump, they controlled Epstein as well. And so we will see some information. We'll go through some information that documents that. We'll see, we talked about Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance and their relationship, and and they have a prominent level of influence over political affairs in the United States. Peter Thiel's company, Palantir, provides the surveillance technology that has been used to advance the DARPA, which initially had been initiated going back to the first Bush campaign, or even Reagan campaign, as a matter of fact, because that goes back to the Ollie North times, and going back to John Poindexter when he was establishing the DARPA, which they ended up later privatizing because of the fact that information was coming out about the Total Information Awareness Program. And so they privatized it and repackaged it. So Peter Thiel is basically in charge of the surveillance state, the Total Information Awareness Program, and people aren't paying attention to it because it's being done by a government contractor who is private. But the government is doing it nonetheless. They just farmed out the work to a contractor to escape the ire of the public. Okay, so I wanted to just go through just that brief overview. If you want to just go back over the information to basically connect those dots, then go back to the prior shows where we've documented those connections. So that brings us up to the current moment. So again, we've documented the pretty intimate relationship that Donald Trump has had with the Rothschild family, and again, they helped him to bail him out of bankruptcy in exchange for, and also put him in the real estate game, because they helped finance his first casino in New Jersey, which he purchased from the Mary Carter Paint Company. So in his first term in office, Wilbur Ross, who was a representative of N.M. Rothschild's and Sons Bank, was brought on as his Secretary of Commerce. So again, I just want to put that back into the record again to basically show that connection between the Rothschild family. And that's important because we are going to see as we go through this information some prominent discussions of the Rothschild family as it relates to Epstein and the Epstein Files. Again, connecting all those dots and underscoring the fact that it is all connected. Nothing has changed. Trump is with the establishment. He's part of the establishment. He's not separate. Okay, so what we're going to do now is go into a video. We probably won't have time to play the whole thing, but we're going to play enough to just basically underscore what I was talking about and to provide some support for what we've talked about before. And let's see, one other thing I wanted to also mention was, what was I about to say? Well, it'll come back to me, but we're going to go ahead and show an interview with Whitney Webb, who did an excellent job of documenting these connections as well. Oh, but this is the thing I was trying to remember. I had pointed out my belief, which is being more supported as information unfolds, but I have maintained on past shows that Jeffrey Epstein was not murdered. I believe that he was extracted from prison, and I believe that he was repatriated to Israel. Okay, and we've talked about in the past about the 3 minutes missing from the surveillance camera in the prison where Jeffrey Epstein was being held around the time of his alleged murder. Okay, so let's go on to the video with Whitney Webb. Get there. Okay, here we go.
Peter Thiel, who envision a world where our habits, proclivities, opinions, and movements are minutely recorded and tracked. These Trump allies do not intend to free us from the tyranny of intelligence agencies, militarized police, the largest prison system in the world, predatory corporations, or the end of mass surveillance. They will not restore the rule of law to hold the powerful and the wealthy accountable, nor will they slash the bloated and unaccountable spending, some $1 trillion by the Pentagon. They are rapidly purging the civil service, as well as law enforcement and the military, not to eradicate the deep state, but ensure that those in charge of state machinery are exclusively loyal to the whims and dictates of the Trump White House. What is being targeted is not the deep state, but the laws, resolutions, regulations, protocols, and rules, and the government, civil servants who enforce them, which hinder absolute dictatorial control. Compromise, limited power, checks and balances, and accountability are slated to be abolished. Those who believe that the government is designed to serve the common good, rather than the dictates of a tiny cabal of billionaires, will be forced out. The deep state will be reconstituted to serve the leadership cult. Laws and the rights enshrined in the Constitution will become irrelevant. It is a coup d'etat by inches, one that will be enforced in crude and brutal fashion by the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency on the streets of our cities, empowered by Thiel's Palantir and the sophisticated forms of monitoring made possible by artificial intelligence and digital surveillance pioneered by Silicon Valley. Joining me to discuss our emergent Orwellian state is the investigative journalist and author of One Nation Under Blackmail, Whitney Webb. You can find her on her website, Unlimited Hangout.
Watch what magnesium does to your bowel.
Why does grandma's tummy look pregnant? This blocks your bowels.
Whitney, let's go back to the beginning. Poindexter, Iran-Contra, which I covered actually when I was in Nicaragua, because that's really the origin of where we are today.
Yeah, it's definitely, I would argue, one of the best starting points. And also, thanks so much for having me on, Chris. So John Poindexter, as of course you know, was one of the national security advisors to Reagan and was the highest ranking member of his administration. That was indicted as part of Iran-Contra, but he is also remembered as the quote-unquote godfather of modern surveillance. And this is in part because of his efforts in the immediate post-9/11 era, pioneering an office within DARPA that housed a program called Total Information Awareness. So right after the Reagan administration, Poindexter was sort of in various roles throughout these tech companies that were sort of a prototype to what Palantir and Total Information Awareness would later do, like Saffron Technologies, Syntec Technologies, that were defense contractors and trying to basically create, use sort of, predictive analytics to determine what terrorists would do next, all before 9/11 even happened. And of course, there was a renewed demand for that type of technology and these sort of innovative solutions in the immediate post 9/11 era. When this information, was reported on Total Information Awareness, there was a huge outcry throughout, U.S. mainstream media. A lot of organizations, including the ACLU and organizations like that, rightly noted that it would eliminate the constitutional right to privacy and create this very disturbing era of mass surveillance by, I think one of the mainstream media reports on it said that it would fight terrorism by terrifying U.S. citizens, basically, and making everyone a suspect under this type of this paradigm he was seeking to usher in. And so it was eventually, under pressure. It was, I think, first announced in February 2003. And by May, they attempted to change the name to Terrorism Information Awareness, trying to move away from the idea that it would be total, it would surveil absolutely everyone through a name change. But obviously, it didn't change how the program actually worked. It would still be focused on everyday Americans. A total dragnet, really. And in that same month where that name change happened, Peter Thiel incorporated Palantir. And as Palantir was developing as a company, Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, the Palantir co-founders, reached out to Poindexter directly through Richard Pearl, who's a well-known neoconservative figure and was also one of the architects of the Iraq War at the Bush-era Pentagon. And, basically they hatched this plan to privatize this program, rightly calculating that if they turned it into a entirely private sector enterprise, the outrage would, essentially dissipate, which it remarkably did, because originally it was a public-private partnership housed within DARPA, and then by making it this private sector enterprise, a lot of the concerns about it disappeared, and this is arguably because by moving into the private sector, they were able to accomplish a lot more than they could have by being affiliated directly with the public sector, even though they contract with the public sector. And so Palantir, funding-wise, was set up with money from Peter Thiel himself, and that the algorithm for it had originally been developed at PayPal, and the other funding source was the CIA's In-Q-Tel. And one of the figures that helped made that funding decision was the CIA's chief information officer at the time, named Alan Wade. And Alan Wade had been one of the top allies of the Total Information Awareness with Poindexter, in the immediate post 9/11 era. And so the CIA was Palantir's exclusive exclusive client for, I believe, the first 6 years of its existence as a company. And its engineers went to Langley, CIA headquarters in Virginia every 2 weeks for several years as well, where the CIA was developing their algorithm with them, in a very direct partnership. And Alex Karp has even said that the CIA was always the intended clients of Palantir. So I guess I'll pause there, and I'm happy to go in any other direction.
Explain what it does, what Poindexter's goal was, and what they were able to establish. I mean, the mechanics of it.
So Poindexter's goal was extremely broad. I mean, it really covered, it's absolutely staggering when you think about it. So the way it was initially sold to the public was this is a way to stop terrorism attacks before they happen, by collating so much data from all different sources, and then using it in some sort of analytic or AI to determine, if certain data points are flagging that a terrorist attack will take place here or there. But there's various different aspects of this program that didn't really get enough coverage at the time. So one is that they attempted to use free market forces to determine if a terrorism attack would happen. Before it happened, they created basically what's referred to as a terrorism futures market. It was really like a forerunner to Polymarket and some of these predictive markets where people bet on things online. It was basically that, but about whether a terrorist attack will happen in the Middle East, or if there will be turmoil in the Middle East, if someone like Yasser Arafat would be overthrown. These were the kinds of things they were going to have these unnamed investors bet on. Another one was focused entirely on health under this program called biosurveillance, which actually a lot of it Palantir helped launch with HHS during the COVID era, things like analyzing American wastewater to determine if there is going to be an outbreak of a disease before it happens, again, with an algorithm, or basically, surveilling Americans' health data and to determine if there will be a pandemic before it happens, or if there will be a bioterror attack. Because remember, this was also in the aftermath of the anthrax attacks. And so a lot of that, particularly on the health front, has absolutely come under the portfolio of Palantir in the years since. They now control basically all of the health data at HHS, and also the CDC under the HHS, and also the NHS in Britain as well, and have continued to expand on that front. But Palantir, also works extensively now in the private sector as well. They're a major AI engine for Wall Street banks, for example, and they have different programs that are sold to different entities, but ultimately they are a massive contractor to essentially every U.S. intelligence agency, and that includes DHS and ICE, which a lot of the critical reporting on Palantir focuses on their contracts with ICE specifically, but all of that is intended to also be used against people that are not illegal immigrants. It's meant to be an entire dragnet of basically pre-crime, and Palantir, in concordance with Poindexter's ambitions, has been a major piloter of pre-crime technology in the United States. I think they began doing that in New Orleans initially, but they call it predictive policing is the term that they use. But a lot of other companies have attempted to also get in on this. One of the most notorious being Predpol, that was a partnership, I believe, with UCLA and LAPD or something to that effect. And they're notoriously inaccurate, and they're almost always piloted in low-income minority neighborhoods, and basically are a way, in essence, what happens, because the accuracy rate is so low, is that you're creating this pipeline of people basically being sent to prison, or being caught up in crimes that are very petty. But you're just sending police to all these areas in a relatively discriminatory way. The Predpol is really outrageous, because it's like accuracy was found to be like insanely low, and they didn't phase it out despite the extreme inaccuracy. It was worse than a coin toss. Essentially, and departments around the country continue to use it. And then in some of these areas where Palantir ended up leaving, another Peter Thiel-backed entity called Carbine also has a predictive policing component, but has been sort of taking over 911 emergency call systems, throughout the United States, which is, generally at the county level. But this is a company that wasn't just funded by Peter Thiel. It was funded by Jeffrey Epstein and was led for a significant amount of time by Ehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister. As well, and has sort of expanded outwards. So a lot of Poindexter's ambitions, unfortunately, have been becoming true at a really rapid pace, and part of this was done under the guise of combating the COVID-19 situation with data, that we needed data to solve those problems.
And are you in essence just creating profiles? I mean, these are just creating profiles.
So I'm going to stop that here for now and just go back over some of the things that she has just said. You'll note that she briefly mentioned Peter Thiel's connection to Epstein and how they had worked together. She mentioned and alluded to the fact that this goes back to John Poindexter, which takes us all the way back to the Reagan administration, the Iran-Contra scandal. DARPA and the Total Information Awareness Program was escalated because they were in the so-called war on terrorism, right? So they created the nebulous enemy that they always had to continuously monitor, which ended up facilitating the surveillance state, because they always had to monitor an enemy that cannot be identified, right? So they're in perpetual war because they're chasing the so-called terrorists, right? And so that helped facilitate the continuous funding of the Defense Department, because before then there was basically no enemy. So they ended up having to create the enemy, terrorism, to help facilitate the transfer of funds to their defense contractor friends using taxpayer dollars, because they had no other reason to basically fund defense contractors, because there was no need for defense at that time. And that ended up playing even further into the 9/11 situation, which then precipitated the Patriot Act, further validating their needs for surveillance. Whitney Webb also pointed out how the information was being used to profile so-called criminals, basically racial profiling, and that also facilitated or went hand in hand with the 3 strikes laws, which ended up helping to facilitate the building of private prisons. Private prisons used the labor from the prisoners to be able to produce goods and services for profit, but they also negotiated into their contracts with the principalities that they located their prisons in, and the governments and cities and states in which they located those prisons. they had to sign contracts where they were required to maintain a certain level of occupancy, right? So all that is connected. Now, I'm going to move from that and, going back to what she had just said about the connection between Peter Thiel and Jeffrey Epstein, we'll go on and show a little bit more of that connection. So let me stop sharing on this, and we'll bring another article here, which will help to underscore that connection. Here we go. Okay. So, and since we last did the episode, I've been accumulating information that we could use on the show to better document our points. So here, this comes from Collective Evolution, and this is an article written by Marcos Paulo Cataloro, and here's the article. The name that appears 12,000 times in the Epstein Files, and no one wants to say. Whoever controls the money controls the story. Whoever controls the story controls the silence. And the silence in this case has 12,000 names. Now, what's key about what Marcos Paulo Cataloro says in his byline there, whoever controls the money controls the story, which sounds very similar to something that Rothschild said. Whoever has a goal makes the rules. And he's also said, he says, let me just control a nation's money, and I care not who makes their laws. And that's because if he has the money, he controls those who makes the laws. And it goes on to say, whoever controls the story controls the silence. And we know that from some discussions in our previous shows, we know that the Zionist Jewish network controls the media. And so that basically underscores why this information that he's going to discuss here in this article has not been part of the public discourse. So he says, in February 2016, Jeffrey Epstein wrote an email to one Peter Thiel, co-founder of PayPal and Palantir, with a sentence that should have made the front page of every newspaper in the Western world. As you probably know, Jeffrey Epstein says, I represent the Rothschilds. The sentence is in the Epstein Files. It's an official document of the United States Department of Justice. And the mainstream press, again, controlled by Zionist Jews, and the mainstream press treated as if it were a footnote about the weather in Bermuda. The name Rothschild appears nearly 12,000 times across the 3.8 million pages released in January 2026. 12,000 times. By comparison, Clinton appears at a significantly lower frequency, but in the media ecosystem that Chomsky helped build, repeating the name Rothschild in an investigative context is automatically reclassified as conspiratorial delusion. I wonder why that might be. Convenient when yours is the most cited name in the largest child sex trafficking scandal in modern history. Now, I think it's important to say that Noam Chomsky is of Ashkenazic Jewish heritage. And he is a thought leader, if you will. And in some documents of the Zionist Jewish Network, they've made the point that they will have someone of their own be the thought leaders. And they will have someone representing both sides of an argument. In their opinion, will be the most prominent opinions that shape the opinions of society. Those are my notes. But we'll go on and read a bit further. But again, note that it is the names of the Rothschild family, not Donald Trump. The names of the Rothschild family, not that Donald Trump doesn't appear prominently in there, because he does. But here he seems to be making the point that the name that appears the most prominently in the Epstein Files is the name Rothschild. And I would submit that that is the reason that the files have been so deeply redacted. In addition to redacting Trump's name, they've spent a lot of time redacting information about the Rothschild family. Okay. Les Wexner, the billionaire founder of Victoria's Secret and Epstein's largest known benefactor, and we've talked about that relationship on past shows and demonstrated how it was through managing Les Wexner's fortune, where Les Wexner gave Jeffrey Epstein power of attorney to manage his finances, is how was a major factor in how Epstein was able to accumulate the level of wealth that he had. Okay, so that's the context when it says Les Wexner, the billionaire founder of Victoria's Secret and Epstein's largest known benefactor, testified under oath, and we have that testimony, which I'll play. Epstein's largest known benefactor testified under oath before the House Oversight Committee on February 18, 2026. Asked about the credentials that led him to entrust Epstein with full power of attorney over his finances, he answered plainly, his personal work for the Rothschild family in France. He added, specifically, I spoke to Élie de Rothschild. He represented their whole family. He's referring to Epstein. Under oath, he said this before the United States Congress. Wexner's attorney was caught whispering to Wexner on a hot mic, I'll effing kill you if you answer another question with more than 5 words. He says, desperation has recognizable symptoms. The documents confirm what Wexner revealed. In October 2015, Southern Trust Company, chaired by Epstein and based in the Virgin Islands, entered into a $25 million contract with Edmond de Rothschild Holding, SA. The subject, risk analysis and application of certain algorithms. $25 million for a convicted child sex offender to run algorithms for the wealthiest family in Europe. And I will scratch that and say for the wealthiest family in the world. It's not who appears in the Fortune 500 or Forbes 500 because the Rothschild family will never appear there for whatever reason, which we know. But the most wealthy person in the world is not Elon Musk. Is not the owner of Amazon. His name escapes me at the moment. It's the Rothschild family. But we'll go on. Ariane de Rothschild, CEO of the Edmond de Rothschild Group since 2023, exchanged emails with Epstein dozens of times per month. The Wall Street Journal confirmed in 2023 that she met with him in person more than a dozen times after his conviction. That was the conviction that occurred in Florida that he ended up just getting probation for, essentially. The bank's initial defense was to deny any contact. Later, they admitted the meetings took place as part of their normal duties. Normal duties apparently include regular meetings with convicted pedophiles. In 2014, Epstein wrote to Ariane de Rothschild, "The coup in Ukraine should provide many opportunities." Now, remember what I said about the Soviet Union being brought about through the Bolshevik Revolution, which was primarily carried out by Ashkenazi Jews. The coup in the Ukraine should provide many opportunities. And mind you, the Ukraine is also the area where the Khazar kingdom was located. The Khazars being the ancestors of the Ashkenazi Jews who converted to the religion of Judaism in the 700s. In 2014, Epstein wrote to Ariane de Rothschild, "The coup in Ukraine should provide many opportunities." Many. Financial manager convicted of child sexual exploitation discussing geopolitical opportunities with the heiress of a $236 billion banking empire. This should have been front page news. It became editorial silence. Across the Atlantic, WikiLeaks emails had already exposed the relationship between Hillary Clinton and Lynn Forrester de Rothschild. Okay, so again, this has nothing to do with political parties at all. Trump's involved, the Clintons are involved, all different levels of power are involved regardless of their political connection, because it's all part of the same thing. Politics, left and right, all that is an illusion for the pawns. In September 2010, Clinton, then Secretary of State, wrote to Lady de Rothschild apologizing for having pulled Tony Blair away from a private engagement with the Rothschilds in Aspen to attend Middle East negotiations. The phrase is verbatim. "Let me know what penance I owe you." The Secretary of State penance. Let me know what penance I owe you. Which indicates a level of subservience. The Secretary of State of the world's greatest power asking penance of a private citizen. In January 2015, before Hillary Clinton announced her candidacy for president, Lynn was already drafting her Lynn de Rothschild. What was her name? Yeah, Lady de Rothschild essentially was drafting Hillary Clinton's economic policy in emails to Hillary's aide, Cheryl Mills. We need to craft the economic message for Hillary. Whoever runs American politics is not necessarily on the ballot, the author says, which I agree. Alan Dershowitz, also an Ashkenazi Zionist Jew, Epstein's former attorney and Harvard professor emeritus, who was also prominently listed in the Epstein Files and who attended parties at the island and in his mansion in Florida and New York, declared publicly in 2019. He says, Alan Dershowitz is saying this, mind you, I was introduced to Epstein by Lady Lynn de Rothschild. She introduced Epstein to Bill Clinton and to Prince Andrew. And as we know, Prince Andrew has been arrested, associated with based on his connections with Epstein and his alleged interactions with underage women. The connector between the pedophile and two of the most powerful men on the planet had a surname, which was Rothschild, and that surname appears 12,000 times in the files. Cindy McCain, widow of Senator John McCain, summed up the situation with a candor rarely displayed by the political class. We all knew, they knew, and I recall that statement, and silence was the collective choice. The pattern that emerges from the documents is structurally clear. Epstein operated as the Rothschild family's financial representative. He used that position to build a network of relationships with billionaires, politicians, and academics, and I will add to that list with the intelligence community, because he was connected to Robert Maxwell, who was known to be an agent of the Mossad, or Israeli intelligence. And I would also suggest that Epstein was as well. That network was the operational substrat of the largest documented child sex trafficking scheme in history. And when the survivors began to speak, the silencing machine operated with banking precision. The Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Warburgs, the Schiffs, and I'll again just illuminate the fact, and pardon the phrase, that the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, and the Warburgs and the Schiffs, these are people who are behind controlling the central banks of Europe and the United States. The Warburgs were agents of the Rothschilds who set up the Federal Reserve, in particular Paul Warburg. Okay, so these are the people who are pulling the strings of the politicians. Century-old billionaire dynasties that thinkers from Carol Quigley, who wrote the books Tragedy and Hope and the Anglo-American Establishment, which discusses the secret societies and organizations that were created by those societies to basically be instruments used to be able to control world affairs. And Carol Quigley, in particular, documented the history of the Round Table Group, of which Rothschild, Baron Rothschild, and Cecil Rhodes were the primary controllers and organizers. And we've talked about that relationship in some of our prior discussions. So just go back into the archives of Journey yourself to get information about that. Anyway, centuries-old billionaire dynasties that things from Carol Quigley to Olavo de Carvalho identified as the de facto owners of the world. Dynasties that survive empires, world wars, and revolutions because they operate on a layer of power that precedes partisan politics. And that's what they're referring to as the establishment, or as is currently known, the deep state. They create central banks, finance both sides of conflicts, install and topple governments with the ease of changing a tide. That is all absolutely true. The press that depended upon these fortunes to exist learned over 2 centuries to treat any mentions of these names as intellectual pathology. And again, the reason is that they control the press. The Epstein Files delivered across 3.8 million pages the documentary confirmation of what these thinkers had identified for generations. There exists a layer of power that operates above governments, above the law, and that protects its own with the efficiency of those who simultaneously can control both capital and narrative. Well put. The United Nations in February 2026, who, by the way, was located in a building donated by the Rockefeller family, the United States agents of the Rothschilds. The United Nations in February 2026 classified the Epstein operation as a global criminal enterprise with acts that may constitute crimes against humanity. 12,000 mentions of the name Rothschild in the documents. And the silence of the mainstream media is so deafening that it has become the greatest proof that the system works exactly as described. Whoever controls the money controls the story. Whoever controls the story controls the silence. And the silence, in this case, has 12,000 names. And that's by Marcus Paulo Candeloro. Okay, bear with me as I scroll to some of the articles that are kind of archived here on my Facebook page here. Here's a good. I'll read this article before I go to the video, because this has some pretty good information as well. And then we'll go and look at the testimony of Les Wexner with his attorney sitting by his side. Okay, and this is from the Midas Touch publication. It says, breaking DOJ files indicate that the FBI sought to pursue child sex trafficking investigation into Trump based upon the accuser's account. Bombshell new reporting by journalist Roger Sollenberger. I'll have to look for that article. It says, newly surfaced details from the DOJ's Epstein Files makes one thing unmistakably clear. Federal authorities took seriously the allegation from an Epstein victim who told the FBI that Donald Trump sexually assaulted her as a child and sought her cooperation in what appears to have been a potential criminal child sex trafficking investigation. As first reported by Roger Sollenberger, internal FBI records show the woman was identified as a victim who claimed abuse by Trump, but ultimately refused to cooperate. Former senior DOJ officials said this language strongly indicates that federal investigators approached her about helping pursue a criminal case involving Trump. In other words, the FBI was not dismissing her account. They were attempting to build a case. And I'll just editorialize by also saying that many people who were abused had declined to testify out of fear because they had been threatened that harm would come to them and or their families if they were to mention it to anyone, particularly the press. So her opting to decline testimony was likely due to her fear of retaliation. The internal email dated July 22nd, 2025, entitled Names in the JE File, lists Trump first among positive case hits. Notably, none of the other prominent names mentioned in Epstein-related materials carry similar annotations suggesting a victim allegation tied to potential prosecution. This aligns with other reporting showing that the woman held a uniquely sensitive status in the DOJ's files. She is reportedly the only victim marked protect source, a designation indicating heightened concern about retaliation. Okay. In one of the earlier shows, we read into the record how and I think that was when we were reading from one of the lawsuits that was filed against Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. One of the victims said in that document that Trump had abused her sexually, and I think he had tried to force his genitals into her mouth, and she bit him, and he slapped and threatened her. And told her to shut up when she was basically begging to not have to be subjected to that abuse. And so she alleged that he just basically slapped her for protesting and threatened her. In one released FBI interview, her attorney cited fear of retaliation when Trump's name was raised. That context sheds light on why she may have declined to cooperate further, even as investigators appear interested in moving forward. At least 4 FBI interviews with the accusers exist, yet only one has been released publicly. The remaining interviews, along with accompanying FBI notes, remain in federal possession but undisclosed, despite DOJ acknowledging that versions of these materials exist outside the protective order tied to the Ghislaine Maxwell case. The DOJ's handling of the broader Epstein file release has already drawn intense criticism. The rollout exposed sensitive victim information, including names, identifying details, and reportedly even censored images of young females. According to the controversy, the DOJ initially published the name of the Trump accuser before later redacting it. Another identifying detail tied to her case reportedly remains unredacted in the public database. Taken together, the record suggests the federal government viewed this woman's allegation not as peripheral, but as potentially central to a prosecutable matter. The DOJ spokesman did not respond to requests for comment, of course. Okay. Here's another article where it says that the Justice Department withheld and removed some Epstein files related to Trump. We'll come back to that later. And let's see. So we're going to go back and because the Wexner testimony occurred last week, so I have to go back to pull that information out. But here's another information about a woman who allegedly was subjected to the abuse. She says that they ate humans, discussing they ate humans. I wasn't aware of anything. I mean, about the murders, yes, but they had eaten humans. They smell like human flesh. It says on or around August 4th, 2009, Gabriela Rico Jimenez was recorded outside the Fiesta Inn in Monterey, barefoot and distressed. She claimed that high profile individuals, including business leaders and politicians, were involved in kidnapping, murder, and cannibalism. She mentioned such names as Mexican businessman Carlos Slim, former U.S. President George W. Bush, and made references to the British royal family and Disney, alleging that they ate human flesh. Police intervened and took her away on live television, and she was never seen again. Now, if you read the book Facts Are Facts by Benjamin Friedman, he talks about that. I did not read that into the record because it was very disturbing. But if you get that book, Facts Are Facts by Benjamin Friedman, he recites a number of incidents in which Zionist Jews engaged in such rituals. Okay, let's see, where is that testimony? I think we're close to it because I just saw the articles about Les Wexner and his testimony. But I did attach the actual secret. We'll come back to that one. It's on the arrest of Prince Andrew. Maybe it's in here. So we'll just go ahead and read this article here. Both of these talk about the testimony from Les Wexner. So let's go ahead and read this into the record. This comes from the Economic Times newspaper. Dated February 20th, 2026. I think the testimony occurred on the 18th. It says during the House committee deposition, U.S. billionaire Les Wexner made explosive claims regarding Jeffrey Epstein. Wexner alleged that Epstein had connections to the Rothschild family as well as high-profile figures and companies, including Jeff Bezos. It's not giving me the whole article. We'll see if we can pick it up here. This is from LifeSet. Globalist Web Wexner says Epstein claimed Rothschild and big tech billionaire clients. Here it is. Les Wexner addressed questions about Jeffrey Epstein's purported financial background and connections during an exchange with an interviewer from GOP Oversight, detailing what he understood about Epstein's experience and the representations he made. Wexner was asked about Epstein's credential and prior work, including reported ties to prominent financial institutions and families. And in the context of those questions, he was asked about what compelled him to choose Jeffrey Epstein to manage his finances and give him power of attorney over his money. And he said that I think it was his experience at an industrial level, like working for a big company like Bear Stearns, and then he had done personal work for the Rothschild family in France, Wexner said. The interviewer sought clarification on the nature of the work, personal wealth management, essentially. The interviewer asked. I don't know, Wexner responded. But instead of reading their quotes of what he said, we'll go ahead and listen to him being interviewed himself. Fortunately, it doesn't that doesn't give us the whole interview. Maybe it's here. Okay. So the question, as I mentioned, was what compelled him, Les Wexner, to engage Jeffrey Epstein to manage his money and to give him power of attorney over his finances. Ooh. So this is a 2-hour video, so we're not going to go into that. I will watch this myself, and next time we'll come back and go over some of the highlights. I also want to bring another video into the record. We'll remove this one and add another one to the stage. And this one will provide some support to what I was saying about my contention that Jeffrey Epstein certainly did not kill himself in prison. I don't think that he was killed in prison. I believe he was extracted from prison. But here's a video that seems to be able to support that contention.
We have a bombshell revelation from the Epstein Files. You guys know we have been following this very closely, and every day it seems like there's something else that is announced or released. And this one is probably the most damning expose of all, if I had to pick one. We had a lot of questions surrounding the death of Jeffrey Epstein, and this drafted statement from the U.S. Attorney's Office really does confirm what many of you have believed for a long, long time. This one is the one that is really making people go, holy crap. This is why they didn't want these files released. Obviously, of course, to protect powerful people, but not just that, also to protect what actually happened to Jeffrey Epstein that night in that cell. It is this release here, and it was Clint Russell from Liberty Lock Pod who shared it. He was the first one that I saw that shared this, and I double-checked the files as well, and I can assure you it is there. Couldn't believe this was real, so I double-checked the DOJ site. It's real. U.S. Attorney Berman announced Epstein's death with letterhead dated the day before he was found dead. It gets weirder. Bill Barr announced Berman's resignation less than a year later. Berman denied he was resigning and was then removed by Barr on June 20th of 2020. Trump denied any involvement, but it was confirmed by later reporting that, in fact, it was Trump who wanted Berman removed. The rabbit hole is endless. So let's get to the document in question, shall we? Here's a screenshot of it here. This is a draft from the United States Attorney's Office, the Southern District of New York, U.S. Attorney General. You see it says here, Jeffrey Berman, for immediate release. Check the date, Friday, August 9th, 2019. It even has the contact information here. So what does this statement say? Statement of Manhattan U.S. Attorney on the death of defendant Jeffrey Epstein. Manhattan U.S. Attorney General Jeffrey Berman said earlier this morning the Manhattan Correctional Center confirmed that Jeffrey Epstein, who faced charges brought by this office of engaging in sex trafficking of minors, has been found unresponsive in his cell and pronounced dead shortly thereafter. Today's events are disturbing, and we are deeply aware of their potential to present yet another hurdle to giving Epstein's many victims their day in court. To those brave young women who have already come forward, and to the many others who have yet to do so, let me reiterate that we remain committed to standing for you, and our investigation of the conduct charge in the indictment, which included a conspiracy count, remains ongoing. Now, this is 2019, and they told you that this remained ongoing. As we know, that was not the case. Okay. But the important part about this draft right here, and I'm going to show you the final one, is the date. Friday, August 9th, 2019. This was the first draft that Jeffrey Epstein was found unresponsive in his cell. But there's just one problem. Jeffrey Epstein didn't allegedly die on August 9th. He was pronounced dead on August 10th. That was a Saturday. This is the most recent bombshell from the Epstein Files that has many people in shock. Now, many of us have said for the longest time that we believe that Jeffrey Epstein was murdered, that he did not unalive himself. And I stood by that for the longest time. And I think many of you did as well. But now you have another piece of evidence that shows you that the U.S. Attorney Office had already drafted correspondence on August the 9th. He was found dead, allegedly, August the 10th. So even if this is the first draft, the date should be the 10th. Now, I know many people may see this and they may say, well, maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe they just happened to get the date wrong. Sometimes people confuse dates. Okay. But the day is also there. The day says Friday. August 10th was Saturday.
Okay, so you see that there's a discrepancy there with the dates, and so she's making the point that the death of Jeffrey Epstein, or the statement about Jeffrey Epstein dying, was drafted before he allegedly died. This sister seems to be of the opinion that he was murdered. Again, I don't believe that. I don't think he was murdered. I believe he was extracted from prison, and that the photos were falsified. I believe he was extracted and basically repatriated to Israel, because as we saw, we've been able to document the fact that, just going back to our previous shows, he had clear connections between Israeli intelligence through his association with Ghislaine Maxwell's father, Robert Maxwell. He and Ghislaine Maxwell had a relationship. It's not unclear, or it's not unlikely that Ghislaine Maxwell was also an intelligence asset, despite the fact that they killed her father. They may have also recruited her under the threat that if she didn't, that she may befall the same fate as her father. We also, as we detail the Roy Cohn and also Meyer Lansky, detailing the connections between intelligence organizations and organized crime, that they operated in the same manner in gathering information, compromising information against individuals, so that they could use them as leverage against them to control them. Okay, and so we saw consistency in how these people operated in gathering this type of information. So we see that same parallel in terms of how Jeffrey Epstein operated. And we know that he had cameras in all the rooms and all of his properties, and not only took pictures, to have videos. So in the so-called files, there's not just phone numbers and written documents. There's video and film evidence of activity. So there's a lot of information that's not being revealed to the public because of the prominent people who are involved. And as you saw, the so-called files, the documents, mention the Rothschild family 12,000 times. Okay, so this is a big cover-up involving the prominent people who control world affairs and those who operate on their behalf, their chosen politicians. All of them are linked in these scandals. They are linked in, engaged in these activities, which can be traced to certain rituals that have been a recurring pattern amongst these certain groups of people. So we'll leave it there for now. We'll continue this next time. We may skip next week because I feel like with other recent events like the transition of Jesse Jackson, many people are inclined to want to try to give honor to Jesse Jackson. I'm not one of them. And I think that we will go into why that is. And so upcoming, I think we're going to, instead of having me do it, we'll watch some footage from our esteemed ancestor, and my mentor and teacher, friend, Brother Steve Coakley, who did an exceptional job of documenting Jesse Jackson's role in the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., as well as documenting the fact that he had been groomed to replace him once that occurred. So we'll weave that in to our upcoming programming. And also we're going to have a discussion about Mr. Ron Karenga, also known as Walana Karenga, who seems to have become or had a resurgence in popularity because of the fact that many people who have been aware of his activities in Los Angeles, many people who were aware of those things are no longer around. And so people have forgotten or aren't aware of it. And so I think it's time to make those things be known. And a brother asked a question as to whether we should be having that type of discussion about Jesse Jackson so soon after his transition. And my answer to that question is absolutely we should, lest it be said that he is someone who should be honored, which is definitely not the case because of his role in working against the revolutionary efforts of our people. Because as we all know now, Martin Luther King Jr. disavowed his initial strategy as he realized that what he was doing was not benefit people, and that he basically was, feeding us to the wolves. So we will be dealing with those areas in addition to continuing our series on Donald Trump inside our establishment. So with that, we'll leave that there until next time. So we'll see you again on Journey in the Self. And if you can, do go to the Caras Unity Center of African Spirituality, where you can see my most this past Sunday, I gave a spiritual discourse on understanding the pursuit of love and happiness, which is provides some very good information. So with that, I'll leave you, and I will return again next time here on Journey in the Self. Hotel.